When it comes to playing fast, most of the discussions will circle around the technical, the mechanical side of discussion, like your picking technique, your two-hand synchronization, finger dexterity, or whatnot. Now, that makes sense because playing fast itself is a motor skill, it is a physical and athletic act. However, just because a subject matter is motor skill doesn't mean that there is no flip side of the coin. And the side that I'm talking about is the mind. And no, I'm not talking about some, yogi manifestation type of thing where you just think of a reality and it will come true. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something simpler, like how you think about what you're doing and how you organize these actions in your head in order to better perform them. Now, this side of the discussion often gets overlooked because we can't see thoughts. You can't get into someone else's head to see what they're doing. And to make matters worse, a lot of the very natural players, like those genius players, at least from my own experience and observation, often they can show you what they do. Like they can demonstrate their amazing abilities, but when you ask them what's going on in your head and explain what they're doing, they can't really verbalize it because they may or may not be consciously aware because they just naturally got it. So they may have never thought about what they're doing, but they can just do it, But just because this topic doesn't get discussed as much doesn't mean that it doesn't have value. In fact, I believe it is just as important as the actual mechanical playing part. Because in sports, that's what athletes do. Now, you might be asking, what do sports and playing guitar have in common? Well, they have a lot in common because, like I said at the beginning, the act of playing itself is a motor skill. And if you want to push speed, you want to push your physical boundaries. So that in itself has everything to do with sports science. So let's take any world-class top-tier athlete, for example. Let's just take pole vaulting, for example. I know next to nothing about pole vaulting, but I know every single action that they do up in the air just for that few split seconds. I know every single action has been carefully, intentionally studied and refined. That's because in order to push human limits and achieve the most optimal outcome, you have to be very intentional with everything that you do. And that mentality should be exactly the same for players who want to pursue speed. When you are practicing, you want to be very intentional and be very thoughtful of what you're doing. And then once you find the most optimal way to do it, you can start to drill that same motion repeatedly again and again until it becomes muscle memory, and then you don't have to think about it anymore. But at the beginning stage, when you're practicing, it is very important to think about what you're doing. So in today's video, I want to share a few examples, including a few mental models that help me make improvement, sometimes make breakthroughs, and sometimes even in rare occasions, like instantaneous results. Like it's kind of like a aha, like eureka light bulb moment that, I was struggling, but suddenly when I start thinking it in a different way, I instantly got it. But I don't want to oversell or overpromise. Like those moments are still rare. And I'm not here telling you that you can use some miraculous mental, manifestation thing to instantly become a shredding beast. No, those moments are still built on top of many, many years of just drilling the same thing over and over. But those mental models are still very beneficial, and I believe it will still help you make progress. So without wasting any more time, let me grab my guitar and let's get started. Alright, we got our guitar. So the very first example that I'm going to share includes two mental models. And the example is when I was playing or practicing the chromatic scale, or the spider walk practice. Now, I've already talked about this mental models in the previous video, so if you've seen it already, feel free to skip to the next example. And the mental model that I'm referring to is what I call grouping, where you take multiple actions and group them into one package and think of it as just one unit. Now, this particular way of thinking could really help people who are stuck behind a speed barrier when it comes to running the chromatic run. So if you've been doing spider walk and you're stuck behind 160, 170, 180, and you just can't break the speed barrier, this is a good way to think about your actions so you can simplify what you're doing. So when you're learning the chromatic run spider walk, pretty much all of us will start slow, right? Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. That is the right place to start. You do want to start slow so you can gradually increase the tempo and make it faster. But with this kind of training, a lot of people will get stuck because they are thinking of every single action as an individual act. So down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. They're thinking every single individual stroke. At speed, that's not gonna cut it. That's not gonna work because at speed, you can't think down, 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 down. You can't keep track. Our brains are just not made to process that much information at that kind of speed. So you really want to simplify it and look at multiple actions as just one single unit. but that sounds pretty abstract. So I want you to do this exercise with me in order to feel what that feels like. So first I want you to do this with me. Just shake your hand like this. Like imagine you just wash your hand and you're shaking the water off your hand, right? It's this shaking action. Anyone with a functional arm should be able to do it, right? Very easy. Now, I want you to shake your hands twice, fast, just quickly, consecutively, like bam, bam, like that, okay? Now, the next thing I want you to do is do that to a count. I'm gonna start slow, so 1, 2, 3, 4. It's still very easy, right? Now, there's some pause in between, so we're doing bam, 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 bam. Let's remove the pause so everything could connect together seamlessly. So I'm gonna start slow. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. At some point, you're going to lose track, you're going to lose your count. That's totally fine. At speed, that's natural to happen. But this task is very easy. I can probably grab anyone on the street, probably a toddler, a kid could do this just fine. Because this action doesn't take much thinking at all. But the funny thing is, when you're shaking up here, it might not mean anything. But if you bring it down to the guitar, hey, isn't this what we're doing when we're strumming the chords? And particularly when I ask you to shake twice, guess what? Down, up, down, up. You are doing exactly what you need to do when you play the chromatic run. Down, up, right? But you don't think about that as down, up, down, up. You just think of it as shake. Or perhaps you think of it shake, shake. Doesn't matter which one you're doing, you're already grouping these actions together as one. You're subconsciously doing it already. And that is exactly how you want to approach when it comes to chromatic runs, especially at speed. You want to package it up as just one single unit and think of them as one. So when you're practicing, you want to practice just as one unit. Starting with a down, down, up, down, up. Make sure that it ends with up. And just practice that unit fast. That way you can scale this action to speed and know that when you start, you automatically, reflexively will complete fourth stroke. So you don't even think about what you're doing, you just know your body's gonna complete this action automatically. That's how I'm able to play chromatic run at speed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And the second mental model in this example is what I call anchoring, and it's basically just following rhythm. So like I said, once you have a packaged unit, you still need to pinpoint a starting point. So in this case of playing a chromatic run, every time I start with the downbeat, that is where I anchor myself to follow the rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. So my anchoring point is the downbeat. Now that is going to change depending on the music, the type of music or the passage that you're playing. I'm going to share with you a different example, and it could actually have very profound and sometimes instantaneous result just by anchoring the passage at a different point. But that will come in the later example. For now, let's move on to example number 2. The second example came from when I was learning a very difficult song called Groove or Die by Andy Timmons. And the main motif of the song sounds something like this. So as you can see, there's a lot going on in that song, and I first tried to learn that song many years back. I think I was about 3 or 4 years into playing the electric guitar, and I had just finished learning canon rock, so I thought I could move on to play something more challenging, and I got humbled very quickly because just the intro lick was giving me a hell of a hard time. So the very first thing that Andy plays is a minor triad starting with 19 and then 15 and then 17. On the B string. A minor triad, right? And then the next part, as you can see on the tab, it's 16 on the lower octave. 16 on the G string, 12, and move down to the D string, 14. So it's basically a minor triad and then a lower octave of the same triad. But you play it twice, like this. So when you look at the tab, that's naturally how you'll probably group those notes together, and that was how I interpreted it as well. So I started drilling and practicing just that. I started trying that way. But I was having a lot of hard time trying to play it this way because you have to jump from this one minor triad position quickly to this triad position. That you have to maintain the shape. It was quite challenging. And even after I practiced for a while, I was still struggling, and there's still a bigger problem than just trying to do that. So one of the bigger problems that I had after I practiced a lot like that is that it doesn't sound fluid like this. Like, it doesn't sound like how it is on the record. So I started to really examine how Andy plays it, and I realized that he's actually moving his hand alone as he's playing. That didn't look like he's jumping like the way that I'm doing. And then that's when I realized he's actually not jumping from one octave to another. He's actually sliding into the lower octave. So like this. So he will play this triad as usual, right? And then he will move his index finger to this B note, which is the beginning note of the next triad. And then he will slide it up and then complete that triad and then do it again. So I'll play it slowly. So the way that you interpret a lick could drastically change how you execute it, and one way may not be as efficient as the other way. Now, of course, someone might say, hey, you changed the technique, so it's not about really how you think, how you look at it, it's just you changing a technique. To that, I would say you're not wrong. It is changing technique, but something you have to realize is that when it comes to guitar tabs, majority of them, I'm just gonna go on and say 99.9% of the tabs that you see online, they're not made by the original artist. So a lot of time, it's just another player's interpretation. Now the note could be right, but the way that it is executed may not be exactly how the original player plays it. So you're just left with the notes. So it's up to you to interpret it differently. That's why I call this mental model reinterpretation. Because if you reinterpret it differently, it could have very drastic different outcome. So that is the second mental model. You can change the way that you interpret a lick and kind of chunk them differently and experiment with a different way that you look at them. Perhaps one way is more efficient than the other way. So let's move on to the third example. Alright, sorry for the quick interruption. I just wanted to say thank you so much for stopping by, and if you like the information that you're seeing so far, please consider subscribing to the channel and check out more tutorials on B3 guitar method. Now, if you want plain materials that will help you improve your guitar skills, be sure to check out my Patreon as well. Link is down in the description and on the channel. Now, let's get back to the topic. Alright, the next mental model is what I call anticipation. Basically, prepare what's gonna come next. And a very good example to demonstrate that is when I was learning Steve Vai's Eugene's Trick Bag, or otherwise known as the guitar duo song from the movie Crossroads. And there is this one part in the song where he's jumping back and forth from the low register to the high register, back and forth very quickly, like. When you're playing something like a passage like that, it is very important that you look ahead of what you're playing. That's why I call this kind of way of thinking anticipation, because you need to anticipate what's to come next. So when I'm playing the high note here, when I'm playing the high register, this is just a very basic major triad this time, right? When I'm playing the high octave, I'm already looking at the lower octave. When my hand move up to the lower register, I'm gonna be looking at the higher octave. And that's how I can anticipate the movement and be able to prepare myself to move my hand into the right fret. And the funny thing is, once you look away, you don't have to think about what you're doing with your fretting hand, because this little major triad is a very simple task. So all you have to mentally process is just to shoot for that right fret mark. This kind of mental framing, this kind of mental model or way of thinking will be particularly helpful if you're jumping from one position to another. So that is the third example. I'm gonna move down to the next and the last example. Alright, the last example came about not too long ago, just a few months back, and I was learning a song called Universal Mind by Liquid Tension Experiment. If you haven't heard that band, it's basically Dream Theater's side project from many years back. It's their little experimental band, okay? Anyway, the song has a very crazy intro riff that I heard for many years, but I never tried to learn it until just a few months back. And one of the mental model that I already introduced earlier called Anchor really drastically changed how I was able to play this riff. So let me show you what the riff sounds like first. So conceptually, this riff is actually quite simple. It's very basic. It's 2 notes on one string. So on 17, and then on the 14 on the high E string, and then you skip a string and play the 15th fret on the G string, and then 14, and then reverse the order to go back. Just like that, 2 notes per string, add 1 string skip in there. But man, is this riff difficult. It is just stupid hard. And of course, John Petrucci just, effortlessly does it because he's John Petrucci. Now, luckily, this pattern in Universal Mind wasn't new to me, so I was able to catch up with the speed pretty quickly. However, I was having such a hard time trying to play it cleanly. And I was doing exactly what I mentioned earlier. You group a lot of actions into one and look at it as one. And you find an anchoring point as a starting point and you shoot for that starting point, right? This is particularly helpful when you're playing a pattern that repeats itself. So naturally, I was anchoring myself with the first note of that lick. I'm anchoring that A note, but I just wasn't able to play it cleanly. I wasn't able to follow. So I started to examine how I could kind of get that part a little bit cleaner. And I noticed that one of the hardest things about this lick, so we do down, up, and then we have to go back, down. Before we go back, we finish on the G string with the down pick. This creates a huge problem because you see, pay attention to where my pick is. Between the G and B string. I'm stuck in between, right? It makes the escaping motion much harder. In order to make a clean escape, you have to basically tilt your pick in a completely different angle. Like you have to shift your pick slant from downward to upward. If you want to cleanly dodge the B string in between, you have to make that clean escape in order to come back to the high string with the up pick. Now, all these terminology that I'm using is all from Troy Grady, the person who runs a program called Cracking the Code. If you're interested, I will link it down in the description. So I started drilling just that. And I use a practicing method that I call burst chunking. So in burst chunking, you take a difficult passage and break it into small pieces, very small chunks. Sometimes it could be as small as 3 to 4 notes. But you must include one thing that you're really having a hard time with. In this case, for me, is making that escape and land back on the F note on the E string with the up pick. So I just drill that. So I just played that a bunch of times. And about 10 or 15 minutes after doing that, I noticed that, hey, if I use the up pick as an anchoring point, maybe that will help me visualize this lick a bit better. So I started to put the anchoring point, shift the anchoring point from the A note, the 17th fret with a down pick. I started to shift the anchoring point to the up pick on the F note. And suddenly, miracle just happened. I was able to play that lick fast at the intended tempo and with ultra clarity. I don't even know what it is, but I just simply changed the anchoring point from the beginning of the riff to the end of the riff. And that's what it kind of inspired this video, because when I noticed that the way that I think about a lick could make this drastic difference, there must be some other areas that I kind of do the same thing. So I started to, gather some of my, kind of put the previous experience together and formulate this video. But once again, as I said at the beginning, this kind of occasion is very rare. This like light bulb, eureka, like suddenly, like miraculous moment doesn't happen frequently. And most importantly, even when I have this kind of moment, it is built on top of 18 years of playing guitar. Alright, so that is everything. We have 3 examples, including 4 mental models. So just as a quick summary of what we talked about today, first we have grouping, where you take multiple actions, group them together, and think of it as just one single unit. And number 2 is anchoring, where you kind of set a checkpoint, so to speak, in your musical passage. The goal is that this is a point where you can mentally keep track of and be able to repeatedly hit that point on time. So you don't have to think about every single note in between. And number 3, we have anticipation, where you think ahead of what you're playing. Again, that's particularly helpful if there is a long travel from one point to another point of the neck. And finally, we have reinterpretation, where you look at the same note like it's in the same exact position on the neck, but you think of them differently. Doesn't matter how you dissect or chop or chunk these notes. as long as it makes sense to you. The whole goal of all these mental models, quote unquote, is just to find ways to think about these musical passages to make it make sense and make it easier for your mind and your body to follow. That's all that is. So I hope that's been helpful. If one of these mental models help you make improvement, specifically if it gave you one of those light bulb aha moments, please leave in a comment. I will absolutely love to hear it. Other than that, if you find the information helpful, please be sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and like the video so more people can see videos like this. With that said, I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!